I'm doing the Incas, and they live in South America. So the Incas are a very warlike people, and they're very powerful and take a lot of pride in their civilization. So the Incas have their empire, which is called Machu Picchu, and this is what this represents, and that is up in the Andes Mountains. So the Incas also created a lot of major achievements, and so some of the achievements are copios, which are basically like calendars. They keep track of harvests, births, deaths, and taxes. So taxes, they actually, when people do taxes, they don't actually physically pay with money, because the Incas actually found money very confusing. So they didn't really use like money or currency or anything like that. So they paid their taxes with labor actually, and they'd maybe do something, for example, like they might do something for whoever lives in the empire that might help the civilization become stronger or better in some way. So another thing is that they had lots of farming. That's another thing that they had very much achievement in. So this is, this represents like my farming kind of, because they did a lot of farming to create their food. And so for their farming they had terraces, because their like land was very like mountainous and things like that. And so basically they had terraces which would help grow like plants and stuff in them. So they also had aqueducts and canals for water systems. So another thing is to get up into Machu Picchu. It was all the way up. So they would have relay runners who would, when they had a message, they would run all the way up to Machu Picchu, and what they would basically do is they'd have to carry the message with their voice, not like with a piece of paper. So they'd have to remember it the entire time running all the way up to the mountain. So the Incas did actually trade, and they traded clothes, jewels, manatee fat, turtle eggs, oil, jaguar skins, and plenty of more things. But so another thing is that their needs and wants were basically, they really wanted to have a lot of like beads and salt, bronze and copper, and like axes and hardwoods, because they found that very valuable. And so that is mostly the Inca civilization.
Okay, so I'm doing the Anasazi Pueblo. They were the first culture in the Southwest. They started out in the north, but then they moved southwest, kind of Colorado, Utah area. Anasazi means ancient ones, which kind of goes along with that they were the first civilization in the Southwest. And they grew lots of things such as beans, corn, squash, and all sorts of veggies. But to grow these things, they needed water, and so they built canals. And their dwellings is what I had this model of. They had dwellings built into steep cliffs, like if anyone's seen Mesa Verde, that is kind of where the Mesa Verde came from. But over time, the Anasazi merged into Pueblos, which is how they kind of changed over time. The Pueblos were farmers, and they believed in spirits. So their belief in spirits caused them to gather in kivas, which were underground rooms where the men asked gods to reign. And the Spanish conquistadors didn't really have much impact on the civilization because they were in different time periods. But the modern impacts that the Anasazi had were their canals, and some of their basket making methods are still used today. They also have medicines and foods that were made by Anasazi. Their economy didn't use money, and they had road systems to transport goods and trade on. They traded with two tribes, specifically the Hanakim and the Mulligan. Okay, so they mostly traded pottery and just things that they made. They didn't really have money, but one of their huge wants was turquoise. Turquoise was like super valuable, and they would trade all their pottery and baskets for turquoise. And so that's pretty much the Anasazi Pueblo.
Hello, my name is Brianna. I did the mound builders. The mound builders were they were divided up into three periods. There were the Anadas, the Hopewells, and the Mississippians. The Mississippians were actually all of them were very rich, but the Mississippians were the richest of them all, which is actually kind of strange because in reality they were actually the last civilization to be living in the Mound Builders chain. The Mound Builders are called Mound Builders because they built these things called mounds. Mounds were these basically tombs that were like pyramids back then, but today they actually look a lot like hills. So actually for a while people had no clue that there were dead people living beneath them. They thought it was just a boring old hill, but they were kind of wrong. They were very, as I said, very rich people, but they also were weirdly tall. In Pennsylvania, there was a news article actually about this a long time ago, where they found these skeletons in a hill, which they figured out they were mound builders. And one of the skeletons was actually 8 feet tall, which is like, 3 feet taller than I am. And there was actually a woman who was found to be 89 inches tall, so that was pretty tall. I did this thing of a mound builder. Since they had tons and tons of jewels and goods in their tombs, I stuck on little glittery stickers. And these are dead people, because what they would do is they would wrap them up in cloth, except their heads would be exposed, kind of like babies. Because they were very respectful to their dead. Actually, mounds were for very common people. They weren't just for kings, they were for lots of people. So, actually, like I said, they're very respectful to their dead. So, they would put tons of these goods in there, but actually, if they were commoners, they didn't really own that many valuable stuff. They didn't own like huge jewels or anything. But there were jewels and like copper in there. So actually, what people do is they would sometimes put something really valuable that belonged to someone else into their tomb, even though they actually never owned it, just to be respectful. Also, they would have hieroglyphics on their tomb walls, kind of like to just explain the person's life and that kind of stuff. They had many achievements. Their biggest one, though, was to make the Serpent Mound, the Great Serpent Mound. This was in their huge city called Cahokia. They lived between southern Canada and Tennessee, and water-based wise, it was between the Atlantic and the Mississippi River. So yeah, their Serpent Mound could actually be a tomb for about 1,000 people. Also, it's called a Serpent Mound because from a bird's eye view, it looks like a slithering snake. So yeah, trading was a huge deal for the mound builders. They did so much trading. Actually, in the tombs, they found so many different things like copper and jewelry, and some things were actually not found in those areas that they came in, which proves that they did extensive trading from places all over, either from places from which are now Mexico, South America, and even other places in America. So they did lots of trading. They actually did not have a currency. They didn't use gold. They didn't pay people like paper money, which obviously no one did back then. But they never paid anyone gold with anything. It was just mainly trading or barter. So yeah.
So the Aztecs lived on a magnificent city built on a swamp, which is also known as modern-day Mexico. Some of their major achievements were the floating gardens, which was a special space that did not require any land space. They also built lots of pyramids, which had temples on top, which the temples were a place to praise and worship the gods. They also had lots of sunstone, which was used for a calendar. And they built lots of art and pottery so they could trade it for other things they needed. They were very warlike people who conquered other civilizations. Their civilization changed over time because of the Spanish. Hernan Cortés invaded Mexico in 1519, and Hernan Cortés and his people landed on the coast of Mexico in February of 1519. He wanted gold and glory from the Aztecs and wanted to turn them Christian. Traded many things. It was a very important part of their life. They traded cacao beans, which was a form of chocolate. They valued the beans so much that it was like a form of money. They also traded their rope makings and pot makings. Some of their needs and wants were sun and corn. They hoped for sun every day, and they needed corn for their daily life. And yeah, that's the Aztecs.
The Mayas, and they would grow their crops by slash and burn. The forested Mayas. So they would go into the middle of the woods. They would burn down all the ground, and then they would plant soil like this. And then they'd plant soil for nutrients. And then a few years later, they would come back and they would grow their crops there. They would mainly grow maize because that was one of their lifestyles. They depended on the maize to take them through life, as well as beans and other things. And so they would trade, obviously, maize because they really liked it, beans, squash, papaya, jewelry, clothes, and obsidian. And they generally lived in the Central America, in the Yucatan Peninsula, and so they would definitely live there. And they had several major achievements. One of them was the calendar, and they also had the writing, the hieroglyphs. And
All of our civilizations have been impacted by the Spanish conquistadors except the Anasazi Pueblos.
So I, again, was studying the Incas, and the Spanish impacted the Incas so basically there was an original king who lived in Machu Picchu, and what happened was he passed away and he had two sons, and the two sons were fighting over the entire empire for a long time, and that really impacted them all, and that really made a huge difference. And so the sons were fighting again, and then eventually the sons passed away. And so the Incas were actually, as I said, they liked to keep their money in a secret place, so they would keep their money in small areas in the temple and stuff. And so eventually the Spanish brought over diseases such as smallpox, and eventually the whole entire Inca civilization was wiped out by that disease. And so basically all the Spanish took over and took the money, and basically, the Spanish overruled the kingdom eventually.
by the Mayan time, by the conquistadors, when the conquistadors came, the Mayans were generally gone, but those that were left were hidden in the woods and stuff. So when the King of Spain came, Francisco de Majo came, he took over the Yucatan and found the Mayas and forced the Mayans into hard body labor and forced them to turn to Christian, even though they were
So I did the mound builders, and the Spanish conquistadors didn't impact them in a huge way. Actually, the mound builders came off normally. Actually, they were sort of conquered by the Spanish people, except they were already dying out, and the Spanish people just came in and sort of took over. So they ended up just becoming a Spanish thing. And anyway, what happened was the Spanish eventually found their mounds. So the mounds had most of these people's money and goods in them. So the Spanish people actually ended up finding where the mounds were and dug them all up and stole most of their valued items. So now today, archaeologists or scientists can only go and find certain simple things. Some valuable things are still there, but most of them are gone.